housing waiting list.
Yeah.
There are other issues about housing management agents that are problematic. To be honest, yeah, I know, Chairman, you're very familiar yourself with the housing point system of allocation by Dublin City Council. The housing associations have introduced another element, which is an interview system. Now, that's a two-sided coin, if you like. Of course, everybody wants to be sure that only people who are going to look after the properties get into them. But having said that, if you automatically exclude people with any kind of problems or difficulties, then you need another way of looking at their needs. And in the last Docklands Master Plan, we introduced the idea, well known and well practiced within the city, of supported housing, which has been done by Focus Housing and other agencies, where people with difficulties can be supported through kind of a learning process of being able to budget, being able to look after children properly and all the rest of it. It's high cost, but certainly it's one of the ways it could be approached. But in terms of the viability of the trust on 72 units, well, we're not looking for profits, so there is no...
I know, don't misunderstand me, Shani, is really what happens within the voluntary housing system is that you need a momentum, a certain amount of numbers for sustainability. And the problem with some of the smaller voluntary housing agencies, especially in Northern Ireland, that set up with kind of 50, 60, 70 units, they've ran into serious financial trouble because they weren't able to spread their costs over a large number of units, and the structures, which you know yourself, is cost of being picked up. But like one of the obvious ones in the cities, because yours are all apartments, is a sink fund, and those are difficulties that needs to be addressed. Now, it may not need to be addressed in this particular bill, but there may be a need for an element of either enlarging the trust to make sure it's financially sustainable.
Well, basically what we took over was an agreement that had been done between the authority and the housing agency. We have ownership of them, but all of the funding in terms of the sinking funds and all those kind of sports go directly to from the City Council to the housing agency. So it's an area that we don't have any response. Well, as the owners of the properties, we have responsibilities to make sure they're done right, but we don't have worries about it in the sense that that particular housing agency has a large number of properties and wouldn't be left in that situation across Docklands. They have a large number of properties and in other parts of the city.
No, yeah, okay. Would anybody else didn't get an opportunity, would like to add something? Everybody's? Okay. Okay, well, I wish to thank everybody for the contributions. This will go up on the website. It'll build into the final report. So can I thank everybody for their attendance here today and for the contributions. And I'll just adjourn now for the department to come in and give their contributions. Sorry, I'm going to adjourn for 5 minutes. I'll start. The meeting is resuming. We are in public session, and we consider the general scheme of the Dublin Docklands Development Authority Dissolution Bill 2040 with representatives of the Department of Environment, Community and Local Government. Is this agreed? Agreed. I welcome the following witnesses to the meeting: Mr. Paul Dunn, Principal Officer; Mr. Francois and Rory O'Leary, Local Government HR; Ms. Gabriel McKeown, Senior Advisor, Planning Inspector on behalf of the Department of Environment, Community and Local Government. Thank you for your attendance here today. And I'll just bring it to normal. I know you are well used to this, but I just have to read through this and I'll skip through as quickly as I can. I wish to draw to your attention the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2) of the Defamation Act 2009, the witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to the particular matter and to continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only as a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given and are asked to respond. You are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect where possible you should not criticise nor make charges against any persons or entities by name in such a way as to make him or her identified. I also wish to advise that the opening statements and any other documents you have submitted to the committee may be published on the committee website after the meetings, and I remind the members of the long-standing parliamentary practice which I outlined at the beginning of this meeting. So if you'd like to do your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the Chair and members of the committee for inviting the Department to present the Dublin Docklands Development Authority Dissolution Bill. First, I wish to introduce myself and my colleagues. The Chair has already done that, so I'll move on. As the committee is aware, the Government approved the heads and general scheme of the Dublin Docklands Development Authority Dissolution Bill on the 4th of March this year, and I expect drafting of the bill to get underway very shortly. The bill is a standalone piece of legislation with the following main aims. It's to provide the necessary legal arrangements for all aspects of the dissolution of the Dublin Docklands Development Authority, to ensure continued local community and business sector involvement in Docklands regeneration through the Docklands Consultative Forum, to provide for the transfer of certain responsibility, rights and liabilities to Dublin City Council, primarily as a consequence of the dissolution, and to provide certainty as regards the planning and the development framework in the Docklands area. The bill is a key component of the overall wind-up process for the Dublin Docklands Development Authority. This process was commenced in May 2012 when the Government decided that the authority was to be wound up. Since that time, the authority have engaged in an orderly wind-up process, which has been supported by the Department. Also, as the committee heard already, Dublin City Council is, on a practical level, supporting the authority in this transitional period. The committee has heard detail on these ongoing arrangements and indeed the future arrangements to be put in place within DCC. Once again, the Department is supportive of the work being carried out by DCC in this regard and fully supports its role in leading the future regeneration of the Docklands. The Docklands is recognised by all as a very important part of our capital city and a key driver of the local and national economy. The purpose of this bill is to ensure the right environment for this unique area is maintained, so it can continue to be that key driver. The bill provides the necessary legal certainty for the completion of the DDDA wind-up process and its transition to DCC. It is the final part of an orderly sequence of events following the Government's announcement in May 2012. It puts in place a clear pathway for the continued involvement of the local community and business sector in the future of the Docklands project. It resolves some issues around planning which have resulted in unfinished buildings and has impacted greatly on the lives of everybody in the Docklands, in particular local residents. As the committee will be aware, Bord Pleanála has recently approved the Docklands Strategic Development Zone. The SDZ now puts in place an appropriate and sustainable planning framework for the Docklands area. It is therefore important that provisions in the bill to deal with the legacy issues surrounding unfinished developments are given legal effect as soon as possible. As the detailed drafting of the bill proceeds, I expect that the proposals will be refined in places, including on foot of further legal advice by the Attorney General's Office. The Minister will, of course, also consider any views of the committee arising out of its consideration of the bill. As I said earlier, I expect that the drafting of the text of the bill by the Office of the Parliamentary Counsel will get underway shortly. At this point, I would be happy to take any comments or questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Before Deputy Cowan is coming, thank you very much for your submission. Can I just run through a couple of items very quickly that's not in the bill, and something that was dealt with in previous evidence from communities sector. In the winding up of the bill, there's a legacy issue in relation to affordable housing and a complicated clawback from relation to the DDDA. And the clawback would be kind of measured as an asset of the DDDA because of its complicated structures. I'd ask, would you look at the legislation or during further drafting to actually allow people that have this relational legacy problem on affordable housing an out clause that they could revert back to the local authority affordable housing and the legislation that dealt with that? And Mr. Dunn, have you looked at that at all yet at this stage?
Yeah, the Department is aware of particular issues associated with the clawback mechanism and the operation of the authority's social and affordable housing scheme. There's no head in the bill specifically dealing with that matter. I'm aware that the Minister for Housing has asked the Housing Agency to conduct a review of the shared ownership and affordable housing schemes, and that review is to be delivered imminently. I think in relation to the affordable housing scheme in the Dublin Docklands Authority area, it is prudent to wait for the outcome of that review. The scheme was mirrored to some extent on the affordable housing schemes within the local authorities.
No, just for clarity, Mr. Dunn, especially the later schemes of affordable housing was a far more complicated one than what the local authorities have. And there's a complication in that it was never expected, obviously, that there would be property prices would drop. So I just ask you to possibly look at further consideration of the bill. That would you would look to see that can be tidied up, and that the affordable housing scheme could possibly mirror what's in the local authority.
Okay. My understanding is that there was no specific legislation or provision in the Authorities Act, Establishment Act, dealing with social housing specifically. So it was the scheme was put in place by the authority itself.
Yeah, but the clawback in itself is the asset of the clawback. In a lot of cases, is that say the unit was valued at €500,000. The unit was sold as an affordable housing scheme at 250,000. The asset then was the differential was 250,000, and that reduced over 20 years. But when you look at the assets of the authority, it would be counted as part of an asset. So, I'm just asking you to look at that and see can it be inserted in the bill, because there's not many, because the vast majority of families, and I would say 90% of the families that purchased under the affordable scheme intends to stay there. Does not intend, but there has been a number of family breakdowns, inappropriate housing units where they initially purchased a one-bedroom apartment. The family size now has grown and they need to grow their accommodation. But they've been caught in this complicated clawback because of property prices drops, is that they can't afford to move on. And both on the north side and the south side, we would have families living in one-bedroom apartments where they need to move on to a family-size unit, and their intention is to stay there. So I would ask you to look at that element of it. Deputy Cowan, do you want to come in now at this stage?
Just very briefly, I think it's important to add weight to your own comments in relation to this whole clawback issue, and it is the view of the majority and of the members of this committee, despite their absence here today. But I think it is incumbent on you to go back to your line minister with a view to seeking to have an insertion within the bill to deal with that very issue, because I don't think it's fair or proper to leave it hanging and people not being aware of that there should be something laid down in the bill for that issue to be viewed in a different manner, which it is universally in other areas of the county or other counties throughout the country. I think there's something specific in this area where it has to be dealt with. Just the other point in relation to the wind-up of the DDA, the unfinished estates, the outstanding development charges, or any social accruement that may find its way to the Dublin City Council. What procedures are in place in that regard? Is there any?
Sorry,
I talked about outstanding issues in relation to unfinished estates, outstanding development charges, issues of bonds that haven't been adhered to. I'm talking about NAMA and talking about any social benefit there may be to the Dublin City Council. What are they? Have they been identified, and can you be sure that they will accrue to that council?
The provision within the bill will transfer all the outstanding liabilities to Dublin City Council. They also have an enforcement role in terms of unfinished development. There is an inventory being done at the moment by the Dublin Docklands Authority to help with the orderly wind-up. So that inventory will provide to Dublin City Council and provide
for any legal impediment to Dublin City Council's rights.
Yeah, the rights basically
will remain despite the name change and so forth, and the transfer of responsibility.
Where Dublin Development Authority is named, it will now read Dublin City Council. So there should be no risk to any of us.
Okay, and in relation to the strategic development plan that An Bord Pleanála has put in place for the area, what representation have the locality in any initiatives or schemes that might be put in place in the future for that strategic development plan? The responsibility of those elected Dublin City Council.
There's provision within the Head 6 of the bill for a consultative forum who will assist Dublin City Council in the regeneration of the Docklands area.
Okay, and that's not a watered-down version of what was there in the past? Are you sure of that?
Well, the provision has been come about from the recommendation of the authority and the council, and the constitution of the proposed consultative forum mirrors what is mirrors what's there at the moment.
Okay, and that's unanimous amongst the members thereof.
I don't think we want to be too prescriptive in the legislation to sort of hamstring the
I know that, but the less prescriptive, the less authority they might have, or the less input they may have, and maybe it should be stated within the bill that they have.
There is provision within the bill to further by regulation, the minister make regulation. So, after the operation of the forum, there may be need for further regulation, and that provision is within the head of the bill.
Okay, well, it's something that we can adjudicate as members when the bill is published, with a view to making amendments if we feel they're necessary, and that once they're not a watered-down version of what was there in the past, and that the people are given a forum to voice their views and their aspirations, and particularly conscious of what Deputy Humphreys has raised in relation to the potential for many of those people to stay within that area for which they have been housed, but in the absence of suitable accommodation, that they're not penalised by means of clawback. Okay.
I just come back in relation to Head 6 and the consultative forum. To a great element, it is in what's currently there's a master plan, it's a set of policies laid down and agreed with the local community and the DDDA. But what's proposed in Head 6 is basically a consultative forum without a policy element or an implementation of a policy. Can we look at, in relation to Head 6, of actually strengthening the consultative forum to a development of a set of policies that would need to be adhered to for developments within the Docklands area, not necessarily the SDZ, but within the Docklands and the hinterland, because don't want to use Deputy Cowan's word of watered-down version, but I think there is a need within Head 6 to strengthen that element where the community, local business, Dublin City Council can work together to develop a very coherent policy element that it'd be very clear to a developer or to a new company moving into the area what would be expected of them. So I'm just asking you, within the development of Health 6, would you look at strengthening the element of the consultative forum to a much stronger as a policy directive forum rather than just a consultative forum?
Right. I think I think it might be reasonably expected that the forum would formulate its own terms of reference and procedures when it is established. The idea of the forum would be to provide practical support to the City Council to enable it to take in its stride the major challenges and opportunities that will emerge in developing the Dublin Docklands area. And it is envisaged the forum could usefully engage in, protecting policies around protecting establishing businesses, maximising job creation, securing new investment, providing certainty to existing residents association, community organisations and business units and future development plans, engaging all stakeholders on long-term infrastructure requirements for Dockland areas, and improving public perception and relationships with all stakeholders. So I think there's a very, broad ambit that the forum can get involved in.
There is, and it was touched on by the community groups that were in here earlier of a type of one-stop shop in terms of if you're going to set up and come in and set up a business within the Docklands area, that there would be a clear identifiable community gain within that. And that would be laid down by the consultative forum, so that they would be able to set a set of terms and policies in place that companies coming in would know immediately what's expected of them. So can you see that as being developed out in Head 6 as a strengthening of legislation?
I suppose the reality is that the government has decided that it's Dublin City Council that is the lead for the future generation of the Docklands under the leadership of the democratically elected members of the council. And in this regard, it's the lead in regeneration of the Docklands within the wider context of the overall development of the Dublin City region. And in that, the consultative forum will have an important part to play to support the regeneration of the entire Docklands area. I think it's a balanced approach. It's an interaction with Dublin City Council to assist them with development within the area.
I think, Mr. Dunn, you're correct. It's a balanced approach. But if you look what's happening within the city, like Dublin is obviously quite important to the recovery nationally. But the Docklands area in itself is very important to Dublin and the regeneration of Dublin. And certainly the majority of brownfield sites are within the Docklands area, but there is an indigenous community, and yes, I very much support the democratic element. But the democratic element will be the elected councillors of appointing the consultative forum, setting out the terms. But there also has to be a policy element of community groups that are going to serve on that, because where councils can have a bigger overview, the local community knows the basic needs that needs to be developed within those areas, whether it's educational, whether it's sports, whether it's playing areas or green areas. So the best people placed to develop those policies in consultation with the democratic structures that are there is the local communities. Now, there will be obviously representatives of the local councillors on the consultative forum, but there is a need for an element of a more defined element of policy for that consultative forum. We can all be consulted, and sometimes people in the inner city feel that they're consulted up to their eyes' teeth, but they can actually get very little dividend for it. So there is a need, and there is a master plan currently there with policies and specific policies. So to empower the local community, I think there's a little bit more strengthening to be given to the consultative forum. And maybe when you're looking at that legislation, you would look at that element of it as about actually empowering the consultative forum a little bit stronger, because it's not just a mixture of local community, it's also local businesses also have an input in that. And for those groups to buy in, they have to see that their policies and their ambitions for their community and for the areas taken on board. And that was very obvious from the business forum when they came in here, when the community forum came in, is they want to see this area thrive, expand, but they actually want to see a dividend for the local community in that area. So I would suggest there is a need for more work to be done within that area.
Okay, good luck.
Just within the SDZ, and this is one of the concerns within the Dublin Docklands from the local community and business area, is the SDZ specifically says is the levies can only be spent on the specific sites of the SDZ, on the footprint of the SDZ. But for social regeneration, there is a need for a pot of money to be invested in social regeneration, whether that's education or community services or capital investment in programs or projects within the area. And through the Docklands Authority, there was a fund of money allowed within that. Through the bill, there is no fund that's allowed. In the winding up system, and I think some of you have an involvement